Hi, 5th grade. This is Mrs. Gyoko with your flipped math lesson for today, 11-7. Today's objective is I can use multiplication to scale or resize something. So what we're going to do today is we're going to think about what happens when we use multiplication, what happens to our product. So for example, like if we take 9 times 5, we know that when we multiply that the product is going to be greater than the numbers that we started with. Well, we have learned how to do fractions. So what happens when you take a mixed number or a fraction and multiply it times fractions and mixed numbers? That's what we're going to find out today. Here is our first problem, and it has 2 pages, so bear with me for a second. Sue knitted 4-foot-long scarves for her friends. After a month, some of the scarves had stretched out longer and some had shrunk. How have they changed? Okay, so they start off, and they start off as 4 feet long, and we're going to figure out, well, how have they changed? And we're going to look at this chart to figure that out. Okay, so Sue started off with her scarf as 4 feet, and it hasn't changed. Joe started off with a 4-foot scarf, and his has changed by 1.5 times. Alan's has changed to start off at 4, and it's changed by 3/4. And June's scarf has changed 1.25 times, 1.25 times. So we're going to figure out, well, what does that mean? What are these changes? Are they getting bigger? Are they getting smaller? Or are they staying the same? So is our answer going to be greater than what we started with, less than what we started with, or is our answer going to equal the same answer? Okay. Let's look at the math. So we have 4 times 1.5. Let's find out what happens when we multiply 4 times 1.5. So I'm going to put 4 over 1, and then I'm going to multiply that times 1.5. So I better change that mixed number to an improper fraction. 1 times 2 is 2, plus 1 more equals 3. So that changed to 3/2. So we move it over here, 3/2. Now I'm going to multiply. 4 times 3 is 12, and 1 times 2 is 2, and then I can simplify by dividing 12 divided by 2, and that equals 6. So now her scarf, instead of being 4 feet long, it is 6 feet long. Okay, we multiplied times a mixed number, and our mixed number, of course, is greater than 1, and it made it bigger than the number that we started with. We started with 4, and it ended up being 6 feet long. So when we multiplied times a mixed number, our answer became bigger. Now let's see what happens when we multiply times a fraction. 4 times 3/4. So I'm going to put my 4 over 1 again. 4 over 1. Whoa, that was terrible. I can do better than that. 4, my pen's not working great, over 1 times 3/4. Whoops. Goodness, 3/4. 4 times 3 is 12. And then 1 times 4 is 4. Okay, 12 divided by 4 is 3. So now instead of a 4-foot long scarf, her scarf is 3 feet long. When we multiplied times a fraction, our answer was less than what we started with. Let's see what happens again when we multiply times a mixed number. 4 times 1.25. So I've got 4 over 1. I multiply it times 1.25, but I better change that to an improper fraction. 1 times 4 is 4, plus 1 more is 5, so I get 5/4. Now I multiply numerators, get 20. Multiply denominators, get 4, and then 20 divided by 4 equals 5. So 5 feet. So what happens to a product when you multiply it times a fraction? Well, if we go back to the problem we had before, this one, here is the product, 3. We started off with 4, so it seems like it gets smaller when you multiply times a fraction. Let's double check and make sure. So I've got 5 times 1.5, and I need to figure out, is 5 times 1.5 greater than 5? Is it less than 5 or is it going to be equal to 5? So I'm going to use those symbols in this little box right there to find if my product is going to be greater, less than, or equal to what I started with, my factors I started with. So let's multiply 5 times 1/2. So I'm going to change 5, put it over 1, multiply it times 1/2, and I get 5 over 2. So that means a 5 divided by 2. 2 can go into 5 2 times, and then I will have 1/2 left over. So 2.5 is what this 5 times 1/2 equals 2.5. So is 2.5 then less than, greater than, or equal to 5? Well, it is less than. 5 times 1/2 is less than 5. I'm going to say that again because it's super important that you understand it. 5 times 1/2 is less than 5. So usually when we multiply numbers, we think like 5 times 2, our answer is always going to be bigger. Well, that's not always the case. When you multiply times a fraction, then your number is going to be smaller. It won't be bigger, okay, if you multiply times a fraction. Let's try it again. 8 times 1/4. Now we know that when we multiply a whole number times a fraction, it should be smaller than the whole number we started with. That's what we just found out. It should be that this is less than 8. Let's find out. 8 times 1/4. I'm going to put 8 over 8 times 1, or I'm sorry, not 8 over 8, 8 over 1, my bad, times 1/4. So I get 8 times 1 is 8, 1 times 4 is 4, 8 divided by 4 is 2. So my answer is 2. That means this is equal to 2. 8 times 1/4 is going to equal 2, and 2 is less than 8. So that tells us every time we multiply a whole number like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a fraction, then we are going to get a smaller number than what we started with. Now what happens to the product when you multiply times a mixed number? So if I multiply times like 1 1/4 or 2 3/2 or 4 5/6, those are all mixed numbers. What's going to happen to the product when I multiply times this? So we have 3 times 1/2. Is that going to be greater than, less than, or equal to 3? Let's find out. 3 times 1 1/2. So I'm going to put my 3 over 1 times, and then I've got to change my mixed number, 1 1/2. 1 times 2 is 2, plus 1 more is 3, 3/2. Then I multiply my numerators. 3 times 3 is 9, 1 times 2 is 2. Then I divide out, 9 divided by 2, 4 1/2 is my answer. So 4 1/2 is what this adds up to. That equals 4 1/2. That is greater than the number 3 that we started with. So it will be bigger. So when you multiply times a mixed number like 3 1/2, your answer is going to be bigger than what you started with. Let's see that one more time. 6 times 2/3, is it going to be greater than 6, less than 6, or equal to 6? Hopefully you should know the answer by now. Let's see what it is. 6 times 2 3/4, I have 6 over 1. Now I'm going to put 2 times 4 equals 8, plus 3 more equals 11 over 4. Then I multiply. 6 times 11 is 66. 1 times 4 is 4. Then I divide out. And 66 divided by 4, so let's see here. 66 divided by 4 is not something I know off the top of my head. 1 times 4 is 4. Subtract, pull down. Let's see here. 6. 6 times 4 is 24. Subtract 2 fourths. Okay, so I get 16 2/4. and we know that equals 16.5. So when we multiply these two numbers together, we get 16.5, and that is greater than 6. So if we multiply times a mixed number, like 2 3/4, our answer is going to be greater than what we started with. If we multiply times a fraction, it'll be smaller than what we multiplied with. Let's practice a few. Now, we aren't going to do the actual multiplying. Without multiplying, we decide which symbol belongs in the box, greater than, less than, or equals to. So we're not even going to multiply. So we're going to compare 3.5 times 2 2/3 and compare that to 2 2/3. So this is the number we're starting with, 2 2/3. We're multiplying it times a mixed number, 3.5. When you multiply times a mixed number, that means is going to be greater than what we started with. Remember, mixed numbers will be greater than. That means that we're going to get bigger. Our answer, the product, will always be bigger. If we multiply times a fraction, then our answer will be less. Our product will be less than what we started with. That means that our products are going to get smaller. Okay? 4/5 times 2 2/3. So we start with 2 2/3 here. You can see that they're both the same there. We're going to multiply it times 4/5. That is a fraction. So our answer is going to be, or what we started with is going to be less than our answer at the end, because this is going to get smaller because we are multiplying times a fraction. We're multiplying times 4/5. Okay? 4 3/5 times 4/4. Compare that to 4 3/5. So we're going to start off with 4 3/5. We're going to multiply times 4/4. Is this side going to be greater than, less than, or equal to this side, 4/5, 4 3/5? Well, hopefully I didn't trick you too much. 4/4 equals 1. So we are multiplying times 1. Every time you multiply times 1, you get the same number that you started with. It will be equals. All right, now your turn. All you're going to do is put in the greater than, less than, or equals to symbols. Okay, 2.5 times 1 2/3 compared to 1 2/3. I expect you to write out this entire problem and then put in less than, greater than, or equal to symbols. Okay, we are multiplying times a mixed number, which means that it's going to get greater than. It's going to be bigger on this side, and it's going to be smaller on this side. Number 2, 1 2/7 times 5/5 compared to 1 2/7. So we're starting with 1 2/7. We're going to compare it when we multiply times 5/5. Okay, hopefully I didn't trick you too much. 5/5 equals 1. So you're multiplying times 1. Anytime you multiply times 1, whatever you multiply times stays the same, and they should be equal. Number 3, 3 3/5 times 2/2 compared to 3 3/5. So we're comparing 3/5 times 2/2 compared to 3 3/5 over here. Compare this side to that side. Okay, again, 2/2 equals 1, so you're multiplying times 1. 1 times anything is going to stay the same, so it'll be equal. Number 4, 3/5 times 4 4/5. Compare that to 4 4/5. Okay, we are multiplying 4 4/5 times a fraction. Anytime you multiply something times a fraction, it will get smaller. So this side is going to get smaller than the original number we started with. Okay, so what that means is if you want to make something smaller, then you need to multiply it times a fraction. For example, if you want to bake cookies, but you don't want to bake a whole batch of cookies, and you want to make half of a batch or make a smaller batch, you're going to multiply it times a fraction, like a half, or a fourth, or 2/3. However, if you want to make something larger, maybe you want to make cookies for the whole class, then you're going to multiply it times a mixed number. And that will make it larger, like 1.5 or 1 2/3. Okay, last problem. 4 1/3 times 2 2/7. Compare that with 2/7. What's going to happen to this number? Okay, so you're multiplying times a mixed number, which means it's going to get larger. So it's going to be bigger on this side. All right, you are finished for today. Thanks a lot. See you later. Bye-bye.